And welcome to Whiskey Politics. I'm Dave Sussman, your host and purveyor here at Whiskey Politics. It's great being back with you. Find us at YouTube, hit the subscribe button and the notification bell. You can find us also at theindependent.io. This is a brand new site. We're going to talk about this more over the next few weeks. This is huge. This site is big money. They are putting a lot of money into this. They just bought Sports Illustrated and a whole bunch of other media as well. And we are proud to be a part of the independent.io. Best place to find us is at the independent.io. Just look for Whiskey Politics with Dave Sussman, or you can just type in davesussman.com and it will take you right there. You can also find us at the Range Broadcasting Network and also all of your favorite podcast applications, including Spotify. We're now on Spotify. Please hit the subscribe button. That way you can download each of our podcasts every week. Also on the Apple Podcast Network, you can please just hit the like button if you're on Apple Podcast and a comment, and that helps others find us, as well as Stitcher, Google Play, and the Ricochet Network. And speaking of Ricochet, our returning guest today, John HINDERAKER, has a fantastic podcast over at Ricochet. It is the Powerline podcast. Highly recommend you subscribe to it. It's fantastic. He and his partners over at Powerline, Paul Miringoff, Steve Hayward, Scott Johnson, they all get together and discuss the issues of the day. And it is wonderful having John returning, one of my favorite returning guests here. He is the president of the Center of the American Experiment. You can find that on Twitter at Mnthinktank and online at Americanexperiment.org. Welcome back, John. How are you?
Hi, Dave. Doing great. Glad to be with you.
It's great to have you back as well. You're one of our favorite returning guests because you're just so in it. You know exactly what is going on. So listen, you're up in Minnesota, and we've talked about this several times before, but we haven't had you on since this whole thing with COVID and now basically the civil breakdown across all these cities across America. And, Trump keeps referring to the American cities that are impacted by this as Democrat-led cities. I don't know how your opinion is of that, if you think that's effective or not, but what we saw, this spark that generated from the George Floyd murder, and that's what it was, that has now replicated itself across the cities of the United States. It started in your backyard. It started in your community of Minneapolis. Talk a little bit about that and what we've now seen basically metastasize across the country.
Well, it was pretty extraordinary, Dave, to be in the middle of a story like this. And the video drove a lot of it. If there hadn't been video, it would have been a kind of a minor local news story, I suppose. But that video went viral. People all around the world saw it. And it sparked, I think, 6 days of rioting and arson and looting in Minneapolis and St. Paul. But it also, as you say, spread to other cities around the country. But we really have been in the eye of the hurricane. And it's an interesting situation, Dave, because the Minneapolis Police Department has been viewed as being somewhat troubled for a long time. You might remember that the last time there was a shooting incident involving the Minneapolis Police Department, it was Mohammed Noor, the police officer, who for no apparent reason shot Justine Damon, a 40-year-old woman standing there in the yard in her pajamas who had called 911. She was the one who summoned the police. And Mohammed Noor shot her, killed her. It was unbelievable. He got prosecuted and is now in prison. So the Minneapolis Police Department has kind of a checkered history. And you mentioned in the introduction that, President Trump has been talking about Democrat-led cities having these problems. I don't know if it's effective or not, but it certainly is true. And I think this is a really good example because of just total failure of accountability. Every single person who has had any responsibility for the Minneapolis Police Department in the last 40 years has been a Democrat. There is no one in the world who could effectively improve the Minneapolis Police Department except the mayor and the city council of the city of Minneapolis. The governor can't do it. The president can't do it. It's their police department. And we have this situation, I'm not sure to what extent it's true in other cities, but it's certainly true here, where we have very far left politicians in all these positions. There hasn't been a Republican, mayor or city council member for years. They run for office against the police department. It's their police department. They do nothing to try to improve it. They do nothing to try to reform it. They just run against it and criticize it. And when something goes wrong like this, they take absolutely no responsibility for the fact that it's their police department. It's really kind of a dysfunctional situation, in my opinion.
So Minneapolis was one of the first cities that started talking about defunding and abolishing the police departments. But we've seen that replicated in Seattle and Portland, San Francisco, New York, Los Angeles, and other big Democrat-led cities as well. We're now seeing this week, for folks listening to this is being recorded on Thursday, that in Portland, I mean, essentially you've got the mayor there. What's his name? Wheeler, I think it is?
Wheeler, yeah.
Yeah, he's essentially stating that although they've got total chaos in the streets and they're trying to burn down the courthouse. It's a federal building, by the way, that they don't want anything coming from the Trump administration. But this city is burning. We see that in Seattle and we see that in other cities as well. What is the leadership? Chicago's another big one, Lightfoot. What is the leadership doing? Is this just so they have so much hatred towards the Trump administration that they're allowing their cities to burn otherwise?
It's hard to explain, Dave. I don't understand how you could be the mayor of a city like Portland where they've had, 55, 56 nights of riots in a row, something like that, city burning, people being injured. And the mayor doesn't seem to care. It seems like he's on the side of the rioters and he has no criticism for them. He only wants to criticize President Trump. I mean, again, the dysfunctionality that we're seeing in some of these cities is really extraordinary. And here in Minneapolis, you mentioned, we were one of the first, maybe the first, where politicians were seriously talking about abolishing the police department. This is completely insane. Minneapolis is a high crime city. Even before these recent riots and so on, Minneapolis is a high crime city, both violent crimes and property crimes. They need the police department. And of course, poor people in Minneapolis know that. The last thing they want is to have the police abolished. And yet the Minneapolis City Council voted, I think unanimously, to put a proposal on the ballot in November as an amendment to the city charter of Minneapolis that would remove the requirement that the city have a police force. The city council actually can't abolish the police force by itself because the city charter requires a police force of a certain size in relation to population, which is about where it's at. But they unanimously voted to put a provision up to the voters that would eliminate that requirement and pave the way toward abolishing the police department. I mean, it's complete insanity.
What does that look like? What is their end game? What is Minneapolis, as you stated, has had a lot of violent protests that basically burned down the parts of your city starting, 60 days ago with the George Floyd situation. But what does it look like, especially if you live in that part of the world, when you are in essence saying that the police cannot respond to crime, that we're going to send out some social workers and MSWs that never studied criminal justice? They're just going to try and mediate family spats and things. What does it look like? What is their goal here?
It's really hard to say, Dave. Our mayor, I should say, Minneapolis's mayor, Jacob Fry, who performed just unbelievably poorly through the riots. I mean, he was just totally over his head. He's a very young guy, inexperienced, inept performance. But a few days after the riots were over, he was giving a talk, one of several people speaking to a big group that congregated in some, open public space in the city of Minneapolis. And some others have been calling for the abolition of the police department. I mean, literally disband the police department. He got up there and he said, look, we got problems, we need reforms, but I really don't think that we should actually abolish the police department in Minneapolis. He was booed off the stage.
Yeah, I saw him in the streets, right? He was yelled at.
Streets. Yeah. Shouts of shame.
Yeah.
So,
how old is that guy? He looks like he's in his 20s.
I think he's 37.
Oh, he looks young for his age then. Okay, but he's still young.
37.
He's a young 37, but that's still young to become a mayor. Your life experience doesn't start, for the last 5-7 years for this guy.
Right. It's totally unqualified for the position. He's kind of a sad case as it's turning out. So, but my point, Dave, is, there's a fair number of people sitting here. I take it residents of the city of Minneapolis. And there's a group of people who seriously, want to talk about eliminating the police department. And I don't know what that means. It's totally incoherent. I mean, you couldn't actually do it. The crime would be out of control. But they seem to have in mind some kind of a model where instead of police officers, you've got social workers, and they don't seem to understand. Police officers spend a lot of their time being social workers. It's police officers that are on the front lines dealing with the homeless, dealing with drug addiction problems, dealing with mental illness, all the problems that our society really doesn't know what to do about. What do? We push them off onto law enforcement. And they do. They're really, in my opinion, the most effective social workers we've got. They spend more time doing that than they do chasing criminals.
Last time we had you on, I was talking to you about the politics of Minnesota because it was in play and maybe still is in play for Donald Trump this year. Minnesota lost, or I should say Hillary won Minnesota by only, what was it, a point or two?
50,000 votes, a point and a half. I forget,
right?
But it was about 50,000 votes.
Yeah. Now, obviously, things have changed. Everything's changed. Post-COVID, nobody can really predict what's going to happen. But where I assume I know the politics of the Twin Cities, I think that goes without saying. But outside of that, what are you looking at and hearing right now on the ground regarding election 2020?
Well, I guess I would start by echoing your comment, Dave. Nobody has any freaking idea what's going to happen. Between COVID and the economic situation and the riots and everybody having to wear masks, every time they leave the house, it's gotten so crazy that I don't think anybody can predict it. And we're still a long way from November. Right. There are more things that are going to happen that we can't predict. But here's what I would say about the state in general, Dave. The Twin Cities are very liberal. You could compare them to Seattle, Portland, other places around the country. Rural Minnesota was slow to become really conservative, getting outside the Twin Cities. Northeastern Minnesota is a mining district in considerable part. And it used to be a huge union stronghold. And it used to be sort of the anchor of the DFL party, the Democrat Farmer Labor Party in Minnesota. And so if you go back just an election cycle or two ago, there were 4 rural congressional districts in the United States that were still represented by Democrats. 3 of them were in Minnesota. 2 of them flipped in 2018. There's 1 left. So this whole revolution where rural America has gone bright red, it kind of came to Minnesota last, but it's here. And so, for example, the 8th district, which is northeastern Minnesota, the traditionally very strong union area, has totally changed. I mean, those people have figured out that the Democrats will do anything to try to prevent them from earning a living. They're trying to shut down really all industry, and it's totally flipped. So now I would say you get outside the Twin Cities, and Minnesota is looking very, very red. And I think this year it's going to be redder than ever.
Enough to push it over the edge for Trump?
Well, the polls don't look good, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, but they didn't look good in 2016. And you and I both know that they're skewed deeply to the Democrats as far as how they're polling, registered voters versus likely voters, I should say. And so we don't know. And also, as you stated correctly, we're 3-4 months away. We're 3.5 months away now from the election. It's not a lot of time, but you've got the debates and you've got the sweet meteor of death and what other incidents are going to happen between now and then anyway that nobody can predict, as you just stated. Right. And so I guess the question that I have for you and for folks in Minnesota, which is, again, a very gettable state for Donald Trump, is I know that there is a tremendous amount of concern, hand-wringing, pearl-clutching right now on the right regarding the behavior, the man Donald Trump is. The approval of his policies by conservatives, right-of-center types, libertarians, and the like, are high. They're sticking with him. But are you concerned that he's turning off more people right now because of his personality, and there's enough people out there, and this may be the Democrat game plan, that are going to be voting on personality versus policy?
Well, that's been a concern for a long time, Dave. I mean, don't forget the Access Hollywood tape. I mean, there were personality issues in 2016 as well. My opinion in general, Dave, if you'd asked me this question in January, I would have said Trump has got a 99% chance of re-election.
Yeah.
Every incumbent president wants to run on a platform of peace and prosperity. And history tells us that if you're an incumbent president and you can credibly run on peace and prosperity, you're going to win. That's how it works. And in January, Trump had that lined up just about perfectly. Then, of course, COVID hit, stock market crashed, economy crashed, George Floyd, riots. All of a sudden, the prosperity is gone, the peace is gone, and he's kind of back to square one. And the biggest thing he's got going for him, I think, is Joe Biden. And one thing you didn't mention, Dave, that's going to happen between now and November is that about 60% of the American public that doesn't yet understand that Joe Biden is suffering from dementia, they're going to figure it out. And it's going to be kind of a shock to a lot of them. And I think that is a big wild card in the deck.
Does that happen during the debates?
I don't know. I mean, we'll find out. It could be, certainly. I don't know how many there's going to be. At one point, the Biden campaign, according to a news story, agreed to have 3 debates. I was stunned at that. I question whether there are going to be 3 debates. We'll see, I guess. I don't know.
The left, the media, and I repeat myself, are now starting to question the idea of debates, and are they archaic and sexist and racist and all these crazy things. Karen Tumulty in New York Times, for example, published something and was talking about it, because if you're on the left, that's got to be your biggest concern right now, because we all know that he's just a puppet on strings, right? That it's the far left that are going to be controlling him, and they're just trying to keep him as limited in scope as possible. If he is going to go out, he needs to read a teleprompter. He's not taking questions. He's not doing any kinds of, rallies or town halls, or he's not going on Fox News and getting interviewed by Wallace or whoever it may be. So I think if there is going to be a pivot in this election, which does not look good for Trump right now, I'm not saying it's over. I think that happens during the debates.
Well, it certainly could, but it could happen other ways as well, Dave. I mean, they can't keep him in his basement till November. The Rose Garden campaign. I mean, you can't do that in 2020. And every time the man appears in public, you can't watch him without the light bulb going on, and you're saying, "Wow, this guy is not." I don't want to be mean, Dave, but the reality is he's not fit to be president.
No,
he doesn't. He's just not there cognitively.
No,
and
if he was our father, we would say to him, "Stay home, sit on the deck, and look at the lake."
Yeah,
this is where he needs to be in his life. No offense, and I agree with you. It's not being mean; it's reality.
Yeah, and so the debates could very well prove to be important. There could be a moment in the debates where it really becomes blindingly obvious that he's just not all there. But I think it's more than that. I think it's just seeing him in action, which people one way or another are going to do. But I want to go back to something else you said, Dave, about Trump and his chances. I kind of started a thought and didn't finish it. But rural Minnesota, greater Minnesota, is now very red. Twin Cities, certainly the cities themselves, very, very blue. And in recent cycles, Minnesota has been like probably most other states, if not all other states, the suburbs have been swinging the wrong way. And suburban women in particular have been voting more and more Democrat. Mm-hmm. And if there's a demographic that doesn't like Trump's personality, it's suburban women, right?
Yes.
And that really hurts him with those voters. And one of my beliefs about this is that the antipathy to Trump is relatively superficial, personality driven. And I think what people on our side need is to have issues on the table that these suburban swing voters seriously care about. Because if they really care, that's going to take priority. I think crime is that issue. I think law and order is that issue. When we had the riots going on, it was really striking. Every suburb in the Twin Cities had a rumor going around that the rioters are coming here tonight. Mm-hmm. And I can't tell you how many people I've talked to. I had lunch with a guy today who made this comment, that during the riots, his wife, who's not a gun person at all, turned to him and said, you've got a gun handy, don't you? And he
Yeah.
said, yeah. My wife did. Again, she's not a gun person, but at one point during the riots, she wanted to make sure that I had a loaded gun in a safe under the bed, which I do. And so when you start threatening the security of these middle-class suburban households, their families, their children, that's going to sober up swing voters, I think, really fast.
I'm with you 100% on that. It's something we've talked about on the show. And I think that when it hits home, when there are tweets and Facebook messages that there's Antifa in your town, and you're all of a sudden scrambling, that couple in St. Louis, I mean, they've been indicted for brandishing a weapon, standing there basically just, trying to avert an angry mob from coming into their home. If you were there in that moment, you would have done the same. When somebody asks you on a polling question, do you like Trump or do you like Biden? Well, a lot of people don't like Trump's personality. But behind closed walls, especially women that want to protect their families, that has to come up. The big controversy over the weekend was Chris Wallace's interview with Donald Trump. And Chris Wallace made a statement, and Trump says Biden wants to defund the police, and Chris Wallace says no, sir, he doesn't. And went back and forth. Trump says, okay, well, I'll prove it. And he got his campaign people to come up and show him something. And it didn't say it specifically. He was talking about diverting and this and that. There's kind of nuance to the way that the Biden campaign is wording it. But the media seem to be playing, and this is kind of a good segue for us here, defense for Biden to try and take the information that the Biden campaign and his acolytes, such as AOC and Ilhan Omar, your local congressperson there, are saying about defunding the police and coming and getting rid of the Electoral College and coming in and making Washington, D.C. a state, so they'll always have new, Democrat senators coming in, so they'll always own the Senate, and more and more, all this leftist stuff. And it seems like the media are playing goalie, like a hockey goalie, and kicking these ideas back out into play and not letting them stick on this candidate. You had an article at Powerline blog. You've been busy this week. You've had several. And it's titled, Do Americans Know Anything? Now, it's a great title for the general question. You were specific about it regarding the New Yorker magazine, coming up with some ridiculous statistics. Something like 2/3 of Americans of the ages of 15 to 35 in emergency rooms are there because of police brutality, right? That was the issue that you brought up, and you could talk about that. But is the media playing defense for this campaign?
Well, sure they are. They play defense for Hillary too. It's open warfare. The media, they're Democrats. Most of them went into journalism to try to help their party and their ideology, and that's what they do. I think the silver lining is almost everybody now understands that. I don't think anybody looks at the New York Times, the Washington Post, or CNN, or any of these folks without understanding that they're just on the other side. They're anti-Trump. Trump was right about Biden. What Biden was asked, can we divert money away from police departments? And he said, yes, absolutely. Well, that's at least a partial defunding. If you divert money away from police departments, but then replenish it, well, you haven't diverted it. Obviously you're talking about taking money that's now being spent on police and diverting it to something else, presumably social programs, right?
Why couldn't Trump say that to Chris Wallace?
Well, Trump's not that articulate.
I was fuming. I was watching. I'm saying, answer the question. Talk about diversion. As you just correctly stated, you encapsulated the whole idea in 7.8 tenths of a second. It's not that hard.
No, but I mean, Trump, Trump is not all that articulate. He can be really good on the stump. I enjoy watching him on the stump. He's at his best when he goes off on riffs, kind of free associating. He can be very funny. He's kind of a natural entertainer. He's got a formidable skill set, but he doesn't have the traditional politician's skill set. And that's one reason people like him. He doesn't talk like a politician. And there are times when you say, Donald, talk like a politician.
Yeah.
Well, answer this question the way some other guy would answer it, but that's not his skill set.
You got a, you mentioned something earlier, and you said 60% of the people aren't going to really wake up until later in the campaign. And that's traditional. They say nobody really starts paying attention outside of our echo chamber, and
Right.
people that follow it like we do, which is kind of not a healthy thing, I think, these days. But 60% after Labor Day will start watching and start focusing. And do you think it begins afresh at that point?
Well, I'm not sure if it totally begins afresh. There's a lot of water over this dam. There's a lot of water over the Trump dam and the COVID dam and everything else. But I do think that some important new factors come into play. And to me, one thing is what happens with the economy, right? We got a ways to go, and we're not sure what's going to happen. But the thing that at least I think we can foresee is that casual, people who follow politics only casually and to whom Joe Biden is just kind of a familiar name. They've heard of him. Yeah. He's supposed to be some kind of a moderate, whatever. When people start talking about and focusing on the fact that he is not all there, mentally or physically, as far as that goes, it's the kind of a thing that won't be said in public. You're not going to see articles in the Washington Post about Joe Biden's dementia. At least I don't think you will. But I think that's the kind of an issue that people talk about between themselves. People talk about that within their family, among their friends. What do you think about Biden? I don't, I think he's getting kind of senile, and I think that's going to be kind of the unspoken undercurrent of the last couple of months of the campaign.
Yeah. One of the biggest issues that has come up since George Floyd, and this wasn't because of George Floyd. This has been in the making by the hard left and the Marxists for 40, 50 years. But it's the whole issue regarding identity politics. And over a year ago, June of 2019, I was on a panel and I was asked to predict who was going to win the Democrat primary and who will be the VP. And I said, it's going to be Kamala Harris. She may or may not be there. I don't see the benefit of a California vice presidential candidate because they've already got California in the bag. But the idea behind that was the identity politics, that they're going to be going after a woman of color. That's more important to them. You wrote an article this week in Powerline. You said, are liberals racists? And you said that the current liberal orthodoxy holds that a person is defined more than anything else by his or her skin color. Those views used to be the very definition of racism. In my opinion, they still are. Do you believe America still feels that the way that you do?
God, I hope so, Dave. This is one of those things where I just can't believe my eyes sometimes. This whole identity politics thing, the idea that the most important thing is your skin color and that people of a certain racial group should all think the same way, all have identical interests, and can be generalized about, carelessly, white people this, black people that. Yeah, that's racism. That's the definition of racism. And it just stuns me that so few people seem to really stand up against it.
You talk about individualism is now frowned upon. And I think as a conservative or right of center type, that it is all about individualism. And now individualism and the term rugged individualism is being cast as some racist epithet by people in leftist quarters. So is this about, I guess the idea, the totality of Marxism is that we all are lumped in to groupthink. And I gotta think that, again, behind closed walls, that people are not inherently comfortable with that as an idea, with the American experiment, if you will, to paraphrase your organization, that's not what we're about.
It sure isn't. I just don't know what to say, Dave. The idea that they, you mentioned individualism is now being denounced as a white, part of white supremacy. Well, there was that famous placard they had at the Smithsonian that they eventually took down that talked about white supremacy and what are the elements of whiteness. And the things like diligence and punctuality and rationality. Yeah. It's like,
being on time is racist, John. How dare you be on time?
It's unbelievable. Strom Thurmond never in his life said anything that racist.
Yeah.
It's incredible. The idea that people who are non-white are not rational, are not diligent, are not punctual, are not it's insane. And yet, and it wasn't just the Smithsonian. I mean, there's a reason they put that up there. This is in the wind. This is something that liberals are saying all around us, that all of the qualities, individualism and so on, rationality, all the things that we grew up believing were good, now are being recast as bad because they are instruments of white supremacy. Can the Democrats really sell that? I got to see it to believe it.
So again, you're so poignant on all of this because this is exactly the issue, and this is the split. And a lot of people, especially those that are never Trumpers or whatever it may be, they say that, elections are not a binary choice. Absolutely. If there's never been an election, before, this is the most binary of choices in our lifetime because we're going in one of two directions. We're at a fork in the road, and tearing down the institutions, basically tearing down the very fabric of our society, as you talked about, law and order. They want to stop children from going to schools, and I want your opinion of that as well. Basically, my county, I'm not even in LA County, that is now delaying my kids from going back to school, which is horrifying. They've already missed 3 or 4 or 5 months of their life. And so the institutions are being pulled out from under us. And I've got to feel at the end of the day, and maybe this is just, the pragmatist in me, I don't know, that Americans behind closed doors will be like, yeah, I don't really like what he tweets and what he says and this and that, but he's kind of the dam, that's preventing us from being, crushed under a tsunami of these red radicals, and because they've taken over the left. I got to think that that's where people are going to end up. You?
I think so, Dave. I'm cautiously optimistic. Let me just put this in local terms for a moment, although it's a totally national phenomenon. The attack on America and its history and its founding and its leaders, the idea that celebrating the 4th of July at Mount Rushmore is a white supremacist event, this has become pervasive, and the Democratic Party owns it. I'll just give you one example, but we've seen it all across the country. A radical group put out a press release saying that at 5 o'clock the next afternoon, they were going to tear down the statue of Christopher Columbus that stands on the state capitol grounds in St. Paul, Minnesota. So this was a scheduled act of vandalism. At 4:30 the next afternoon, here they come. Here are the vandals. And the state police are there. And the state police have been ordered to stand down, not to do anything, but to protect the vandals from passersby who might be unhappy with toppling the statue of Christopher Columbus. And so they protect the vandals as they bring down the statue successfully. And the lieutenant governor of the state of Minnesota then puts out a statement praising the vandals for illegally, destroying the statue of Christopher Columbus and talking about indigenous peoples, blah, 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 right? And what's the point of Christopher Columbus? What they're saying, and there have been numerous attacks on Columbus as well as Lincoln and Washington and everybody else. The point is that the whole discovery of America by Europeans was a mistake. Was a tragedy, was a crime. And that's the point of, they're not saying Christopher Columbus was not as nice a man as he could have been. That's not the point. The point is that every single thing about the United States of America is bad. And it would have been better if the continent had never been discovered, never been settled by Europeans. That's what these people believe. And we've polled this. My organization has polled, what do people in our state think about some of these issues? And when we asked, how did you feel about the toppling of the Christopher Columbus statue? 34% said disgusted, 20% said angry, and 20% said sad. So, the large majority of Americans,
Yeah.
hate this stuff. And my hope is that the leftists are going too far. I mean, rioting has not suddenly become popular. There's no way that arson is now a winning campaign platform, right? I mean, even in places like Minneapolis and Portland, people aren't that crazy. So my hope is that the left has gone too far and that the voters, this is the other element, of course, the voters are smart enough to associate Democratic Party politicians with these radicals on the left.
Let's hope so. And I think that there's a lot of people that are waking up. I'm having conversations with friends of mine, not leftists, but moderates. Let's call them moderates. Probably left of center on most things, and maybe right of center on fiscal policy, let's say, which I would suggest represents a vast majority of America, by the way, right? Most people, are somewhat, common sense when it comes to the fiscal nature of our country, and they believe more of a laissez-faire, live and let live when it comes to social politics. So the question, the question that I get from a lot of people is, when I going back to our earlier point here, when I turn on the news, I'm hearing something completely different than what I'm seeing. For example, was it Portland or Seattle? I think it was Portland. There was this entire thread on Twitter that Trump sent in the soldiers, unidentified, with rental vans, and started taking people off the streets and then taking them to what, I don't know, black ops sites or something like this. And this became a reality for people. I turned on the news that night, watching it on YouTube, and I saw names on these people. And yes, there were some rentals of vans where people were just being taken to jail, and they were being processed and let out on the streets again because we've got no cash bail. But forget that for a moment. The narrative of black ops sites and Trump and, he's coming in like Nazi Germany is insane. But that is people's reality now, John. How do you fight against that when social media and mainstream media seem to promulgate this?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. There are people who say, this is the post you mentioned earlier that I wrote about, do Americans know anything anymore? Where the most insane things are repeated as facts, and you look at it and you say, wait a minute, time out. Does somebody seriously believe that this can be true? But there are some people. Now, I think the hope is that they're a minority. I mean, Twitter does not represent the American people, right? I mean, anybody that thinks Twitter,
it represents our journalists today, though, and that's what comes out in mainstream news.
Yeah, to a degree. I mean, the classic to me is when you talk about the relationship between the rioters and the journalists, is how time after time, you'll see references in the press to mostly peaceful demonstrations, right? What does that mean? Mostly peaceful. Tell me about the other part.
They just want to burn down the courthouse, but it's peaceful.
It's mostly peaceful. One of the classics of the genre was in Minneapolis on the second night of the riots. The single most destructive thing that the rioters did was to burn to the ground a 6-story apartment building that was under construction. It was going to be subsidized housing for poor people. And it was this gigantic fire. Never seen anything like it. And there's some guy from CNN or MSNBC or whatever it might be standing there, with this burning building behind him, describing this as a mostly peaceful protest. There's gunfire going off and stores being looted, and right behind him is this 6-story high blazing torch of a building. But that's a mostly peaceful demonstration. So we've got this insane world of journalism where these reporters and editors try to run interference and paper things over and deceive people about what's going on. I don't think they can do it.
It's pretty scary. You also wrote about, and I just alluded to it a couple of minutes ago, you also wrote about that it is time for us as a country to reopen the schools. Now, I don't know what's happening in Minnesota, but in California, basically Gavin Newsom has taken, and this is a separate issue altogether, but I think it needs to be addressed. He's taken these statistics of these positive results that are coming out now because, you know, millions, I think something like 1/6 of the country now has been tested. 4 or 5 months ago, you know, they were testing dozens of people a day. Now they're testing hundreds of thousands, okay? And many of those results, and this, by the way, is from the CDC, many of those results are being conflated with a test, which is the blood test, okay? Which essentially shows whether or not you are positive for having coronavirus, any coronavirus in your system at any time, which means, and the CDC states this, I can put the link below, folks, if you want to check it. This is on the CDC website, that if you've had a common cold, you will test positive or could test positive for coronavirus. And it is those numbers that are now being used, first by the mainstream media to talk about these hot pockets, these hot zones, Arizona, California, Florida, and Texas, and the like, where the death count is still going down. I don't know if we're going to see an upswing because that takes 1, 2, 3 weeks. But you're now starting to see states like California that are saying to the kids, my youngest is starting high school, that you're not going to go back to school. Even though we all know this, and you talk about this in your article on Powerline, time to reopen the schools. I think you stated that scientists, a UK epidemiologist said yesterday that scientists are yet to find a single confirmed case of a teacher catching coronavirus from a pupil anywhere in the world. So what's going on here? Is it UTLA, the teachers' unions? Is it their power, or what are we looking at?
Well, in my state, that's what's going on. The teachers' union very much wants not to have school. Their stated reason is not concerned for the safety of the kids so much because, you know, there was another study in the UK that concluded that up to the age of 15, children are more likely to be killed by a lightning strike than by COVID-19. So it's kind of hard to argue you're doing it for the children. So the current argument is the fear that you mentioned, you know, that the children will give it to the teachers and the teachers could get sick. But again, there's not a confirmed case of that actually happening any place in the world. And it's not exactly a heroic posture for the nation's teachers and teachers unions to be taking. I mean, really, you know. And I think what's going on in part is that if you have the opportunity to get paid without having to do very much work, you know, there's a certain temptation there. But, you know, it's a terrible idea for a lot of reasons to keep kids out of school. Kids need to be in school. They need to be in class. Online learning, you know, works up to a point, but it's not the same. It's not a substitute. A couple of weeks ago, I interviewed in a webinar the governor of South Dakota, Kristi Noem.
She's wonderful. Future president, in my opinion.
Well, I'll vote for her. I'll tell you, she's really good. And we talked about this.
She's pretty easy on the eyes as well.
Yeah, that's true too. And she said, in South Dakota, we're opening the schools, you know. And she said, when we closed the schools in the spring, what we found was somewhere between 20 and 30% of the kids were never heard from. They never logged on. They never took a test. They never completed a homework assignment. They were just gone. And I've seen similar, I haven't seen data from Minnesota, but I've seen similar kinds of numbers from other states. Well, you know who those kids are, right? These are not the kids with the two well-educated parents that are heavily involved in education, who will stand over their kids and make sure they log on and, you know, make sure they do their homework assignments. No, these are the kids who need school the most, who don't have those advantages going for them. And it's just criminal, criminal. To allow them to fall between the cracks by canceling school. And the other thing is, you know, kids need to be with their friends. Kids need school, and they also need activities. You know, you can't sing in a choir by yourself. You can't play football by yourself. You know, we got to get life going again.
It's really, listen, as I mentioned, I have my youngest is 15, so he's in high school. My oldest is online in college, but you know, at 15, you're still very much in your formative years. And while adults can think of a year going by really quickly in our lives, as they do, we're almost in August at this point. It's incredible. But at that age, you know, a 4-year high school career is a big part of your life. It's a huge part of your life. And now they're preventing kids. They stopped them from March through graduation. They didn't have graduation, and now they're preventing them from going into school. Let's say at a minimum, it's just 7 or 8 months. This is going to deeply impact, and it already is, John, the psychology, the emotional aspects of kids. And we're seeing kids that are depressed. My son is, he's okay, right? But I could see it. It's having an impact on him. He misses his friends. And I don't know why they are. I do know why. The UTLA, the Teachers Union of Los Angeles, which is one of the biggest unions in the country. And by the way, I said this to my oldest son the other day because he says, well, they just need more money. I said, if you go to the Teachers Union in downtown Los Angeles, and I assume it's like this in Minneapolis, and you take a look at the parking lot, almost every single car in that parking lot is German. Your Audis, your Mercedes, your BMWs. These are secretaries and administrators that are all earning 6 figures a year. And I've read multiple reports, and maybe you can illuminate us more on this because I'm sure you're much more learned than I am on this, that much of the money that is funneled through by the government and taxpayers that goes through to the education administration, and it gets funneled through the unions, doesn't make it to the classrooms.
Well, yeah. One of the things that we're seeing all around the country is everybody is spending more and more money on education, and they're getting worse and worse results. And in any normal industry, that would be a problem, right?
Yeah.
more money, worse results. Someone would try to remedy that. Only in education is there so little accountability. There's just no consequences, no matter how bad a job you do. And one of the things that we see is that the budgets keep rising, but relatively little of it winds up in the classroom. It's all the other stuff. It's the administrators and the diversity consultants and the programs of every kind of program under the sun. And the increases are not being driven by anything that's actually happening in the classroom that's educating our children. And the teachers' unions are awash in money, absolutely awash in money. I'll tell you a funny thing. When we're in Washington, D.C., if we're feeling flushed, one of the places my wife and I love to stay is the Jefferson Hotel. It's a beautiful, beautiful hotel, not far from the White House, and very, very expensive, very expensive. And they've got a bar there that's lovely, and it's kind of, it's basically, for high rollers. Well, what's across the street from the Jefferson Hotel? There's this big, lavish building that belongs to one of the national teachers' unions. I think it's the NEA, but don't quote me on that. But it's one of the big national teachers' unions. It's a huge, lavish building there in Washington. And who do you bump into if you go into the bar at the Jefferson Hotel for a drink? Well, you bump into teachers' union executives. I mean, these people, being an executive of a teachers' union is a really posh way to make a living. And a lot of people don't understand that. A lot of people have this old image from the 1950s, of the dedicated, underpaid public school teachers. Well, that image is way, way out of date.
A lot of people don't even know this, but it wasn't until we had Jimmy Carter as president that the NEA even existed, right?
I think that public sector unions in general didn't become legal until the 1960s, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
And I don't remember about the NEA in particular, but these organizations have come to really dominate our politics.
Yeah.
And it's a very recent
their push, and this is our last point here. By the way, I'm going to replay an interview that I had with an anonymous high school teacher from LAUSD after this, folks. So stick through this because they're going to give us their impressions of what they're seeing from the ground, not what we're hearing from the unions. It's completely different from the teachers. But their focus right now is, you just mentioned, they're political machines. And when they said last week that for them to reopen the schools in Los Angeles, I think it's the second largest school district in the nation, that they need to see that they are going to defund the police, that they're going to defund charter schools, that they want Medicare for all, and a whole litany of other extreme leftist issues, environmental issues and climate change, and it just goes on and on and on. They are no longer representing their kids, John. This is left-wing hackery at its finest.
Yeah, the teachers' unions have never been about kids. The teachers' unions sell out the kids at every opportunity. They couldn't care less about the kids. Teachers' unions are worse for our children's our education than anybody else in our country. They deserve unmitigated contempt.
Yeah, absolutely. Tell us a little bit about, and for folks, where they can find you at the Center for the American Experiment.
Yeah, Center of the American Experiment is at Americanexperiment.org. We're a state-based policy organization, a think tank, but we also are activists. We just, within the last couple of days, have put up 38 billboards supporting the police around the Twin Cities metro area.
Did you?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Okay, so you put billboards up supporting the police.
Yeah.
What was the local response to that?
Well, we've gotten a lot of positive response. We also had one defaced last night.
Just graffiti or?
Yeah, somebody wrote police murder us across the billboard, and then where it said support mnpolice.com, that's a website we've set up, they wrote over the word support the word prosecute. So, it's a very bitter division, but we've polled this issue. 85% of people in Minnesota support the police. This anti-police movement is a small minority of people who have lost all touch with reality, and all normal people understand that we need to have effective law enforcement in our communities. So our viewers can go to supportmnpolice.com, take a look at that. A lot of information there, a petition that you can sign. And so we do a lot just basically to advance education on issues from a conservative perspective across our state.
It's very much needed, and it's grassroots organizations like yourself, and you guys need funding. So everybody check out your website again is? We're going to have it here below.
Americanexperiment.org.
Americanexperiment.org, and check them out. But it's, listen, coming back to the initial part of our discussion, John, Minnesota is a gettable state for the Republicans this year. I still believe that after all of this nonsense over the past 5 months. I truly believe that once you get outside of the blue cities, you get into the suburbs and some of what people are now calling exurbs, and then obviously the rural areas, that people are looking at this and just thinking that we are living in. Remember growing up, I don't know if you were a comic book fan. I wasn't so much, but I remember Bizarro World, Superman. It was the opposite of reality, right? There was an evil Superman and everything was bad. This is what the world we're living in right now, that this viewscape, I guess their desire that they're trying to sell you as a product from the left right now is a complete opposite of what we believe is the way that we want to have a society. You want to have trust in your institutions. You want to have public policing. You want to have your children in schools. You want to have your borders secure, and on and on and on. They seem to want to vanquish all of this. And I've got to think people in the great state of Minnesota and across the country are going to look at this, whether you like Trump or you don't like Trump, and realize that this is, they can't vote for that. I'm hoping anyway.
My final comment, Dave, is this election should not be about whether you like Trump. This election is about whether you like America, because the left is trying to destroy our country. And you don't have to like Trump to care about America and not to want to see it destroyed. That's what this election is all about.
Yeah. Everybody check out your incredible website, John Hinderaker, over at powerlineblog.com as well. You've got some fantastic partners over there, Steve Hayward, Scott Johnson, Paul Miringoff as well are writers, and you guys are just putting content up every single day. It's a bookmark page for me. All right, I got rid of Drudge 2 or 3 years ago. You guys are right up there now. And keep writing, keep giving us the perspective that you are, because I think for most people, right of center, left of center, just, basically common sense people, you guys are speaking to truth. So thank you so much for taking the time, John. Greatly appreciate it.
Thank you, Dave. Great to be with you.
Take care. Talk to you soon. And as John and I were just finishing up talking about what is going on with the teachers' unions, holding our children hostage for leftist demands, so they don't open up the schools unless they get their way on certain things like charter schools and defunding the police. What the heck does that have to do with teaching our children? Anyway, on our last radio show, we had an LAUSD high school teacher call in anonymously to talk about their feeling of what they're seeing happening right now with the teachers' unions and how they don't have anybody representing them right now because the teachers' unions are manipulating the media and they're manipulating, the statistics of people that support them, closing down the schools. And from what we understand, based upon this discussion that I had with this anonymous high school teacher, well, you know what? The feeling on the ground is a lot different than what we're hearing in the media. Shocker, I know. Anyway, enjoy this quick, it's about 12-minute discussion that I had with this caller online at Realside Radio, where I guest host on the Salem Radio GCN Radio Network. And then let us know what you think in the comment sections, whether it's YouTube or the Independent.io, Ricochet, wherever it is that you are watching or listening to this show. And welcome back. Dave Sussman still here in the chair in hour number 2 at Realside Radio across the fruited plain at the GCN and Salem Radio Network, 73 stations as well as 7 television stations. And of course, you can find us on the realside.com, therealside.com. And if you hit realside.com/watch, you can watch us live right now and chat with some of the the best radio listeners in all of America. Hey, chat room. How you guys doing? So, just had Amanda on. We were just talking about what's going on in the newsrooms, but before that I went off. I had a rant because I am absolutely furious about what we're seeing happening right now in the city of Angels in reference to the children being held hostage by UTLA, and I made a point stating that this is a Marxist approach to get leftist gimmies pushed through, such as getting rid of the charter schools, no more competition, getting rid of the police. This is incredible. And I asked you, I said, if you got something to say about this, especially if you are an LA Unified school teacher, give us a phone call. And we have an LA Unified school teacher on the line. We're just going to call him Anonymous. I know the teachers union is powerful. Welcome to the show, Anonymous. How are you?
I'm doing well, Dave. How are you doing tonight?
I'm great. Thanks for giving us a call. So, based upon, what I'm looking at right now, do you concur with my and a lot of people's perspective that this is, in essence, the UTLA holding the children hostage for leftist causes?
I absolutely, agree with you 100%. Being a member of that horrible union myself, I can tell you personally that some of the mandates that they want, some of the demands that they're asking for, it's more than just the closing of the charter schools and the shutting down of the police. It's Medicare for all, run health care, a statewide wealth tax, housing for the homeless fully funded, financial support for undocumented students and families, a federal bailout because of the CARES and HEROES Act didn't provide enough money that they needed and everybody fell short. It's everything other than what would be best for the child.
So that's incredible to me. Everybody that I'm hearing, scientists, pediatricians, everybody, unless you're watching the pre-selected folks over at MSNBC and CNN, are saying that the kids need to be back in school. So in essence, are they putting their politics over the benefit and the health of the kids right now?
The argument the whole time is that it's for the benefit of the children and making sure that they're safe. But then when you look at the arguments that they pose, I think it's everything that's contrary to that. And ultimately, as we experienced from the end of the last semester with the online experience, it's not beneficial for students to be in front of the TV, in front of technology for that long. I teach high school. High school 9th through 12th graders are semi-independent. If you have kids who are K through 8, they need assistance. How about the parents who are single-parent families? How about the parents who have special needs children who need additional assistance for their student? What's going to happen to those students? I just don't understand the reasoning behind it. If they're saying it's to keep people safe, I think they're doing the contrary. New York just had a study come out where they asked the people who had contracted the COVID, where are they coming from? And it's in these packed housing urban communities. And it's obvious. And we're sending our kids and keeping them in those environments. And it's going to do much more harm, I believe, than the good that they say it's going to do.
We've got Anonymous. He is a high school teacher in the U.S., the LAUSD, Los Angeles Unified School District. And the union this week essentially just shut down going back to school unless their demands were met, which are a whole series, a litany of leftist demands. Let me ask you, you're here on the radio. This is a nationwide show, 73 stations. You can't say your name. Are you concerned that that the union will come after you or fight you in some way? Because I've heard from a lot of teachers that I know personally that say they think that kids should be back in school, but they're afraid of the union.
Yeah, you know what, Dave, to be honest, keeping it anonymous is the best way to do it with the union, because they have very powerful allies, as you well know. And the leftist cause and the way the left does their business nowadays would be very harmful, not only to my personal experience, but my family's as well. So keeping it anonymous is the best way. But yes, do I believe that they would come after? Absolutely. And there's not a lot of people who think like me. You know, I'm one of those rare birds on a campus that thinks opposite of what the flock usually thinks, which, you know, in today's day and age makes it very dangerous for one.
So what are we looking at for LAUSD? It's what is it, the largest school district in the nation or the second largest?
It's the second largest, and what was announced the other day by our superintendent is that at least through the fall semester, which you know carries us through the November election season, we're going to be online absolutely 100%. Now, what's going to happen, Dave, is that the other smaller districts across this, the state, which have already decided to open in some hybrid fashion or some other form, they're going to start looking at what the large districts are doing. And my fear now is that those smaller districts are going to do the same thing as LA, and they will go to online 100% as well. And once again, my concern is for the single-parent families, parents of special needs individuals, and the fact that students need to have interaction with not only adults, the teachers, but other students as well. And to be real honest with you, Dave, my magic is done in the classroom, face-to-face with my students, not online through a Zoom meeting.
What options do you have? Because when you take a look and you dig into the weeds, it says the union says that 80% voted to shut down, to not reopen. 80%. Are those real numbers? And if so, I mean, you're done, right? There's no arguing with them.
Yeah, the 80%, I believe, was a survey they did. I'm not positive about that, but I think it was a limited sample survey, and that's what it comes from. But I can tell you, just from my experience, there's many who are in education who don't mind it being shut down, who don't mind it being closed. As much as they say they want to be with the kids, and they do, their health and their fear for their safety is number one, and that is going to override what the health and the welfare of the child is going to be, unfortunately.
So are there any remedies to this?
As what I can see right now for this, I don't see a remedy, to be honest with you. We can protest, parents can protest, but I don't see with Governor Newsom and his new edicts that he's passed down in the last couple of days as well. I think it solidifies their position, actually. And as you'd been mentioning earlier, I think these are some of those tactics that are used on the left. I've been told I'm cynical for saying it, but I think they want to push this through the election because it's the only way that they'll get a mean orange man out of office, and this is what they have to do. And so they'll continue on this path.
Teachers like you must be few and far between, Anonymous. And, what's really concerning to me, and you said that this may be spreading in other counties. I'm in a different county from LAUSD. My youngest is supposed to be starting high school next month, and they seem to have a game plan here. But every day I get a text from them, and I'm almost afraid to look at this point, that they're going to follow suit. Is this something that do you think is going to, as a teacher, and you've got high school kids, so similar to my age, my youngest anyway, is this something that you think is damaging long-term for the kids?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Our kids have missed out already on half a year of the social interaction experiences that schools provide. Now they're going to miss another. So that's a full year now of those social interactions at a time when we all agree most critical for young people, because that's when they're developing. They need to develop those social skills of interaction, of dealing with others, of feeling frustration and overcoming it. All those things are gained through interactions with not only teachers but other students as well. And that is completely lost. You cannot replicate that no matter how good you do on an online platform. You can't replicate that on a computer.
Why, we've got 2 minutes here, Anonymous. Why is it that the UTLA and the teachers, you know, the American Federation of Teachers, it says, I think the second largest union in the country, why are they so left?
Wow, that is a great question. But you know, Dave, it's academia. Academia has been overrun by the left. As you have talked about many times before, our major institutions, the institutions that we are crying about racial injustice, are all controlled by the left. Hollywood is controlled by the left. The media is controlled by the left. Academia is controlled by the left. Major corporations and technology are controlled by the left. It is a top-down. It's something they've been working on systematically, I believe, for many years now. And right now we are in the midst of the worst storm we have ever seen in terms of this. We've been able to fight back in the past. But right now there's a prevailing storm that no matter how conservative you may be, it's an ugly weather pattern that's out there in terms of political.
Well, in our last minute here, Science Magazine concurs with you. They said continued closures risk scarring the life chances of a generation of young people. And that was signed by pediatricians, child health all across the globe. They say the kids need to get back in school. And what UTLA has done this week is essentially they have put a ransom on our kids. And Anonymous, what you're telling us is that, you know, from the front lines there, that this is going to have a detrimental impact on our kids, on our children. And we should be looking beyond politics. But, you know, after listening to what you're saying right now, there's not really a remedy. There's not really a way for you to fight back. I got to tell you, that's devastating. That's really depressing the heck out of me, man.
It really is. It really is, Dave.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, it is a situation as it
Anonymous,
is.
high school teacher in LAUSD, thank you so much for sharing your insight of what is going on. I'll be back here for our third and final hour here after the break at Real Side Radio. Don't go away, folks. Dave Sussman here in the chair. Thanks. Thanks for joining us here at Whiskey Politics. Greatly appreciate you taking the time. Please, again, find us on all of our social medias. You see them down below. YouTube, independent.io, Ricochet, Apple Podcasts. Of course, you can find us on Spotify now. Please subscribe if you're listening to podcasts on Spotify. That's a great platform. And Stitcher, Google Play, and the like. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back again real soon here at Whiskey Politics. Cheers.